There are nights that disappear into memory, and then there are nights that follow you for the rest of your life. October 1968 was humid in Hong Kong, the kind of heavy, suffocating heat that clung to your skin long after the sun had gone down. Most of the city had already quieted by midnight. The neon lights still flickered above Nathan Road, and somewhere in the distance a ferry horn echoed across Victoria Harbor. But in the narrow back streets of Kowloon, the world felt smaller, darker, more intimate. It was in one of those alleys that I saw something I have never spoken about publicly. Until now. Only a handful of us were there. A few late-night gamblers, a noodle vendor packing up his stall, 2 dock workers cutting through the shortcut on their way home, and me, and Bruce Lee. At that time, Bruce was already becoming a controversial figure. He had returned from America not just as a martial artist, but as something else, something the traditional circles didn't fully understand. He spoke openly about evolution in martial arts, about discarding what was useless, about adapting instead of blindly preserving. Some respected him, others resented him. That resentment had been building for months, and that night it finally stepped out of the shadows. Bruce and I had just finished a late training session. He insisted on walking instead of taking a taxi. "Movement keeps the mind clear," he used to say. He wore simple black trousers and a light button-up shirt, sleeves rolled just below the elbows. No dramatic entrance, no audience, just another quiet night. Until they appeared. Our 3 men stepped from the far end of the alley, blocking our exit. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but then 2 more figures shifted behind us near the alley mouth, not to attack, just to watch. Word had spread. Something was about to happen. The tallest of the 3 moved forward first. I recognized him immediately. His name was Lau Iron Fist Ming. He wasn't a formal martial arts master. He didn't belong to any traditional school, but in the underground fight circuits, he was known. Thick shoulders, long arms, a crooked nose that had been broken more than once. He had built his reputation in dockyard brawls and gambling house disputes. People said he could knock a man unconscious with a single body shot. To his right stood a heavier man, shorter but wider. His head was shaved, and a jagged scar ran from his left eyebrow down to his cheek. His fists were wrapped in cloth tape, not for protection, but to harden the knuckles. He cracked his neck slowly, as if warming up. The 3rd man said nothing. He was lean, quiet. His eyes never left Bruce. Not angry, not emotional, just measuring. The air changed. The noodle vendor stopped packing. The dock workers froze mid-step. No one spoke. Lau Ming tilted his head slightly and looked at Bruce with a half smile. "So," he said casually, his voice low but clear, "the famous Bruce Lee." Bruce didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at them, calm, breathing steady, observing. Lau continued, "They say you teach that old masters are outdated, that traditional fighters are limited. That street fighters like us don't understand real martial arts." Bruce gave the smallest hint of a smile. "I teach efficiency," he said quietly. "Nothing more." The shaved-headed man laughed. "Efficiency?" he mocked. "In the streets, there are no rules, no forms, no philosophy. Just survival." The 3rd man finally spoke. 3 against 1, he said flatly. "That's survival." My stomach tightened. I stepped forward slightly. "There's no need for this," I began. Bruce raised his hand gently without looking at me. A silent signal. "Stay back." Lau Ming took another step forward until the overhead flickering bulb cast sharp shadows across his face. "You talk about evolution," he said. Let's see how your evolution handles reality." Bruce slowly unbuttoned the cuffs of his sleeves and rolled them up higher. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just preparation. "I don't want trouble," Bruce said calmly. "But if you insist," he added softly, "don't mistake calmness for weakness." The shaved-headed man spat on the ground. "Enough talking." And, without warning, he lunged, fast, A heavy right hook aimed directly at Bruce's jaw. I barely had time to inhale. Bruce did not step back. He stepped forward, just 6 inches. The punch sliced past his face, so close I heard the wind of it. In the same motion, Bruce's right hand snapped out, not wide, not dramatic, just a short, direct strike to the attacker's center line. The sound was sharp, not loud, but precise. The shaved-headed man stumbled backward 2 steps, confusion flashing across his face. Not pain yet, just surprise. Lao Ming's expression shifted. The silent third man narrowed his eyes. This was no longer intimidation. This was engagement, and something in the atmosphere changed completely. The alley felt smaller, the air heavier. The dock workers backed up against the wall. The noodle vendor dropped a metal lid, and it clattered loudly against the concrete, the only sound besides breathing. Bruce did not chase. He reset his stance, relaxed, balanced, hands slightly forward, inviting. Lao Ming's jaw tightened. "All together," he muttered. And that was the moment I realized this was no ordinary street confrontation. This was a test, not of Bruce's strength, but of his philosophy. The 3 men began to circle slowly, one to the left, one to the right, one directly ahead. Bruce turned with them, adjusting angles subtly. No wasted movement, no panic, just quiet calculation. I had seen him spar dozens of times. I had seen him train against skilled martial artists. But 3 experienced street fighters in a confined alley at midnight? This was different. The silent fighter shifted first, a faint shoulder twitch, a distraction. At the same instant, Lao Ming charged from the front, and the shaved-headed man rushed from Bruce's blind side. 3 directions, 1 target. I felt my heart slam against my ribs, and then Bruce stopped reacting and started controlling. What happened next lasted less than a minute. But it changed how I understood martial arts forever. And the crowd that had gathered in that dark Kowloon alley would never forget what they witnessed that night. The first rule of street fighting is simple. There are no rules. When the 3 men moved at once, it wasn't chaos. It was coordination. The silent fighter darted left, feinting low. Lao Ming came straight down the center like a charging bull. The shaved-headed enforcer cut off Bruce's right side, aiming to trap him against the damp brick wall. 3 angles. No escape. Or so they thought. Bruce didn't retreat. He shifted. Just a slight pivot of his lead foot, barely noticeable, but enough to change the geometry of the alley. Lao Ming's heavy step forward committed his weight fully. The silent fighter's feint turned into a real strike. A low kick aimed at Bruce's knee. The shaved-headed man swung a wide hook from the right. Most men would have tried to block. Bruce intercepted. His lead leg snapped down just enough to jam the low kick mid-motion. At the same instant, his left hand shot forward in a straight punch, not toward Lao Ming's face, but toward his throat. Not full power. Control. Lao jerked backward instinctively. His charge disrupted. The shaved-headed enforcer's hook came in hard. Bruce ducked under it, stepping inside the arc. His shoulder drove into the man's chest while his right elbow struck upward, short, compact, brutal. The sound it made wasn't cinematic. It was dull. Impact against bone. The enforcer staggered sideways into the brick wall, air leaving his lungs in a harsh gasp. But there was no pause. The silent fighter had already closed distance. He was faster than the other 2. No wasted motion, no wild swings. His fist came straight for Bruce's ribs. This one landed. A solid body shot. I heard the breath leave Bruce in a sharp exhale. The crowd flinched. For the first time that night, Bruce had been struck cleanly. Lao Ming saw it too. Encouraged, he surged forward again, this time throwing a combination. A jab to distract, followed by a crushing body punch designed to end it. Bruce shifted his weight backward just enough to soften the jab. The body punch slammed into his forearm instead of his stomach. But even blocked, it carried frightening power. Bruce's shoes scraped slightly against the wet concrete. He was being pressed now. 3 men, relentless. The alley felt smaller by the second. The dock workers had backed fully against the far wall. The noodle vendor stood frozen, hands trembling. And still, no one intervened. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a street execution attempt. The shaved-headed man recovered faster than I expected. He wiped his mouth, rage building in his eyes, and lunged again, this time lower, attempting to grab Bruce's waist and drag him down. Street tactics. Dirty. Effective. Bruce reacted instantly. His hips dropped. His forearm came down across the attacker's neck while his knee drove upward into the man's shoulder. At the same time, he twisted his torso sharply, redirecting the momentum instead of resisting it. The enforcer stumbled past him and collided into Lao Ming. For half a second, all three were off balance. That half second mattered. Bruce didn't rush. He repositioned, centered himself, breathing steady despite the growing redness on his ribs. The silent fighter circled again, eyes calculating. "You're good," he said quietly, "but you can't handle all of us." Bruce's reply was calm. "You're already not moving as one." It was true. Their coordination had cracked. Lao Ming's aggression was personal now. The shaved-headed man was angry. The silent fighter was cautious. 3 minds, 3 egos. Bruce saw it instantly. Lao roared and charged again, throwing a heavy overhand punch meant to crush through defense. Bruce stepped forward, not away, and delivered a lightning-fast straight punch that landed flush on Lao's nose before the overhand could fully descend. The crack echoed sharply in the alley. Blood sprayed. Lao stumbled backward, stunned. The shaved-headed enforcer swung wildly again, this time without precision. Bruce parried, pivoted, and drove a short side kick directly into the man's thigh. A precise strike, not flashy, but devastating. The enforcer's leg buckled immediately. He dropped to one knee, clutching it in shock. Now it was 2. The silent fighter realized the shift. His eyes hardened. He attacked with real intent this time, a rapid combination aimed high and low, testing Bruce's guard. Bruce blocked the first strike, deflected the second, but the third grazed his cheek. A thin line of blood appeared. The crowd gasped. For a brief moment, the alley was nothing but movement and breath and sharp, violent sound. Then something changed. Bruce stopped chasing exchanges, stopped reacting to individual strikes. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. His eyes sharpened in a way I had only seen once before during intense training. He wasn't fighting 3 men anymore. He was solving a pattern. Lao Ming wiped blood from his nose and roared again, charging recklessly. The shaved-headed man forced himself up despite his damaged leg. The silent fighter prepared to flank. All 3 committed at once. And that was their mistake, because in that exact moment, Bruce stopped reacting and started controlling. What happened next did not look like chaos. It looked like inevitability. There is a moment in every real fight when noise disappears, not because it becomes quiet, but because your mind stops hearing it. When the 3 men rushed Bruce again, something shifted inside him. I saw it in his eyes. No anger, no hesitation, no rush, just clarity. Lao Ming came first, blood still dripping from his nose, rage fueling every step. The shaved-headed enforcer followed half a beat behind, limping but determined. The silent fighter angled outward, attempting to flank and trap Bruce against the narrow wall. 3 directions, but this time Bruce wasn't waiting. He stepped toward the smallest gap between them, not retreating, not blocking, but cutting through the center of their formation before it fully closed. Lao's punch came heavy and direct. Bruce slipped just outside the line of attack and drove a short vertical fist straight into Lao's sternum. The sound was sharp and hollow. Lao's breath exploded out of him, his body folded slightly forward, not from pain alone, but from shock. Before he could recover, Bruce's elbow whipped upward into Lao's jaw. Compact, precise. Lao's head snapped sideways. His massive frame staggered 2 steps and crashed shoulder first into the brick wall. But Bruce was already turning. The shaved-headed enforcer tried to grab him from behind, desperation now replacing confidence. His taped fists wrapped around Bruce's torso. For half a second they were locked. And then Bruce dropped his weight. His hips twisted sharply. One arm hooked under the attacker's elbow, while his other hand struck downward at the wrist. A clean break in structure. The enforcer's grip collapsed. Bruce stepped across his leg and rotated, a tight, efficient hip throw that used the man's own forward momentum against him. The impact against the concrete floor echoed through the alley. The crowd gasped audibly. The enforcer tried to rise, but his injured thigh buckled beneath him. He collapsed again, clutching his leg in disbelief. Now it was just 2 standing. The silent fighter had hung back just long enough to observe. He moved differently from the others, measured, strategic. He lunged suddenly, not wild, not emotional, but sharp and disciplined. A straight punch toward Bruce's throat, unfollowed by a low kick targeting the same damaged ribs Bruce had taken earlier. This time the kick connected. Bruce exhaled sharply. For a brief instant, the silent fighter saw advantage. He pressed forward, 3 rapid punches, high, low, high. Bruce blocked the first, redirected the second, but the third grazed his temple. A thin line of blood traced down his cheek. The alley felt electric. I realized something in that moment. This was no performance. This was survival. The silent fighter attempted a final aggressive push, a forward rush, meant to overwhelm Bruce before he could reset. And that was when Bruce shifted fully into control. He stepped inside the attack, dangerously close, eliminating the space the silent fighter needed to generate power. His hands moved like flashes. A finger jab to the eyes, not to blind, but to force a reflex. A palm strike to the collarbone. An immediate elbow to the side of the jaw. 3 movements, less than a second. The silent fighter's balance shattered. Bruce didn't give him room to recover. A short side kick drove into the man's knee, not snapping it, but hyperextending it just enough to break his structure. The silent fighter collapsed sideways, crashing into a stack of wooden crates that splintered on impact. Silence. Only Lao Ming remained upright. Barely. He pushed himself off the wall, fury and humiliation mixing in his expression. "You think this makes you better?" he growled, charging one last time with everything he had left. It was reckless, uncontrolled, desperate. Bruce didn't retreat. He stepped forward. Inside the arc of the punch, his lead hand struck Lau's forearm, redirecting it just inches off target. His rear fist drove straight into Lau's solar plexus, deep, surgical. Lau's body froze. In that suspended moment, Bruce followed with a final short hook to the jaw. Not wide, not theatrical, precise. Lao Ming collapsed heavily onto the damp concrete. The entire fight had lasted less than 40 seconds. 40 seconds. 3 experienced street fighters, down. The alley was silent. Not even the harbor horns could be heard anymore. The shaved-headed enforcer struggled to sit up, eyes wide with disbelief. The silent fighter lay on his side, clutching his knee, breathing hard but conscious. Lao remained flat on his back, staring up at the flickering light above as if trying to understand what had just happened. Bruce stood in the center, chest rising slowly, blood on his cheek. Shirt slightly torn, but calm, controlled, unshaken. He looked at each of them carefully, measuring, ensuring they would not continue. The dock workers exchanged stunned glances. The noodle vendor whispered under his breath, "Impossible." But what happened next shocked the crowd even more than the fight itself. Bruce walked toward Lao Ming. The man flinched instinctively, bracing for another strike. Instead, Bruce extended his hand. "Get up," he said quietly. Lao stared at him in confusion. "You could have finished it," Lao muttered hoarsely. "Why didn't you?" Bruce's voice was steady. "Oh, because I wasn't trying to destroy you." The alley remained frozen in disbelief. In that moment it became clear this was never about proving who was stronger. It was about proving something deeper, and what Bruce did next would leave a greater mark than any strike he had thrown. For several seconds, no one moved. The alley that had just witnessed violence now felt like a temple. Lao Ming stared at Bruce's extended hand, not with anger anymore, but with confusion. Men like Lao had grown up believing one thing: power earns respect, fear keeps it. And yet the man who had just defeated him, calmly, efficiently, without cruelty, was offering help instead of humiliation. Slowly, Lao grabbed Bruce's hand. Bruce pulled him to his feet. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap.
They were too stunned. The shaved-headed enforcer was sitting against the wall, holding his thigh. The silent fighter had pushed himself up to one knee, breathing hard but steady. None of them rushed again. The fight was over, but something bigger had just begun. Bruce looked at Lao directly. "You came here to prove something," he said quietly, "but you were trying to prove it the wrong way." Lao's jaw tightened. "What do you know about my way?" Bruce didn't raise his voice. Real strength doesn't need witnesses. The words hit harder than any punch thrown in that alley, because everyone there knew something had shifted. This wasn't just a street fight. This was philosophy in motion. Lao finally spoke again. "They told us you were just fast. Oh, that you were show." Bruce wiped the thin line of blood from his cheek. Speed means nothing without control. He looked around at the dock workers, the vendor, the growing crowd. "You fight because you think it gives you identity," he continued. "But fighting without understanding only makes you predictable." The silent fighter slowly stood, favoring his leg. "Then what do you fight for?" he asked. Bruce paused. "For growth." That answer hung in the air. The harbor wind picked up slightly, carrying the smell of salt and diesel fuel through the alley. No one laughed. No one mocked. Because what they had just seen could not be dismissed as luck. 3 attackers, 1 man, 40 seconds. But what left the deepest impression wasn't the speed, it was the restraint. Otto Bruce could have injured them permanently. He could have embarrassed them in front of everyone. Instead, he had stopped exactly when it was enough. That was control. That was mastery. Lao glanced at his 2 companions. "Why didn't you finish me?" he asked again. Bruce's answer was simple. "Because one day you might understand this moment." The shaved-headed enforcer lowered his eyes. The silent fighter nodded slowly, almost respectfully. The tension that had filled the alley was gone, replaced by something else: reflection. Bruce adjusted his torn sleeve and turned toward the alley exit. No dramatic walk, no victorious pose, just calm steps. But before he disappeared into the street, Lao spoke one final time. "Wait!" Bruce stopped. Lao took a breath. "So, what you did tonight, it wasn't about winning, was it?" Bruce didn't turn fully around. "No," he said. "It was about showing that power, without discipline, is weakness." And then he walked away. The crowd slowly dispersed. People whispered. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others simply replayed the movements in their minds. But everyone understood one thing. They had just witnessed something rare. Not just a fighter, a thinker, a man who understood that violence is easy, control is hard. Years later, stories like this would circulate quietly through Hong Kong's streets. They would exaggerate the speed. They would exaggerate the opponents. But the core would always remain. Bruce never fought to dominate. He fought to demonstrate. And that difference changed everything. Or because what most people never understood about Bruce was this: he wasn't obsessed with beating opponents. He was obsessed with mastering himself. Every punch had purpose. Every step had intention. Every fight was a lesson. And in that alley, under that flickering light, 3 men learned something they had never been taught before. Strength without ego. Speed without chaos. Power without cruelty. And maybe that's why moments like this still resonate today. Not because of the violence, but because of the message hidden inside it. Anyone can react with anger. Few can respond with discipline. Anyone can win with rage. Few can win with clarity. If there's one thing this story proves, it's this. Real fighters don't look a certain way. They don't act a certain way. They don't shout the loudest. They don't threaten the most. They move with purpose. They strike with precision. And when the moment ends, they walk away. And that was Bruce Lee. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more legendary moments of discipline, power, and mindset. Because the greatest battles aren't fought in alleys, they're fought within.